Dark clouds hovered over the Baltic horizon, carrying with them an air of secrecy that even satellites couldn't decode. Deep within Sweden's airbases, hidden in forests and snow-covered landscapes, engineers and pilots were preparing something that the world thought was only a myth. For years, whispers had circulated through defense circles that Sweden was quietly perfecting an aircraft capable of exposing the vulnerabilities of even the most advanced military alliances. No one believed those whispers until now. The Gripen roared into the sky, but not in the way ordinary jets did. It seemed to slice through the night with an almost ghostly presence. Its radar signature was nearly invisible, its speed breathtaking, and its maneuverability unlike anything NATO analysts had ever recorded. Within moments, a formation of Gripen fighters vanished from radar screens, only to reappear directly over a simulated NATO fleet exercise. Commanders on the ground were stunned. How could Sweden's jets bypass systems designed to detect even the stealthiest aircraft? The answer lay in secrets buried for years. Gripen had been designed not just as a fighter, but as a predator of electronic warfare. It didn't merely evade radars, it confused them, feeding false signals that made enemies chase shadows in the sky. NATO officers who monitored the exercise were left in disbelief. Their billion-dollar defense grids had been breached in minutes, not by an overwhelming force, but by a handful of Swedish jets. Pilots inside the Gripens remained calm, their faces hidden behind oxygen masks, their eyes scanning the skies with clinical precision. Each movement was deliberate, each strike simulated with devastating accuracy. The jets swooped down like falcons hunting prey, locking onto targets that were supposed to be untouchable. The silence inside NATO's command rooms was louder than thunder. Screens flickered with warnings, alarms blared, and systems rebooted. But the Gripens were already gone, slipping back into the night as if they had never existed. What followed was a storm of fear. NATO realized that the threat wasn't just the aircraft itself, but the philosophy behind it. Sweden had proven that power wasn't about building the biggest or most expensive jet. It was about creating a weapon so unpredictable that even giants trembled before it. Questions began to echo in every capital. If Gripen could humiliate NATO in an exercise, what could it do in real combat? Rumors spread like wildfire. Some claimed that the jets carried technology capable of hijacking enemy drones mid-flight. Others whispered about secret AI-driven systems inside the cockpit that allowed pilots to anticipate threats before they even appeared. Officially, Sweden denied everything, but silence only deepened the mystery. The world had just witnessed the awakening of a force it never expected, and NATO knew one thing for certain. The balance of power had shifted, and it was Sweden that had tipped the scale. The echoes of that night refused to fade. In hushed meetings, NATO officials replayed the exercise over and over again, searching for answers. But there were none. The Gripen had done what no one dared to imagine. It had pierced the shield of the most powerful military alliance in the world. And as dawn broke over Europe, a single chilling thought lingered in the minds of generals and politicians alike. Sweden had revealed a truth too dangerous to ignore. The first part of the mystery had unfolded, but it was only the beginning. What NATO feared most had only just begun to take shape, and the next chapter of this silent war was waiting to emerge from the shadows. The silence after the Baltic incident was deceptive. NATO tried to dismiss it as a technical glitch, a momentary failure in their systems. But behind closed doors, the truth weighed heavily on every commander's shoulders. They had been humiliated, not by a superpower, but by a nation that wasn't even fully inside their alliance. Sweden had quietly reminded the world that silence can be the loudest weapon. In underground bunkers, NATO analysts dissected the recordings. Every radar trace, every frequency spike, every communication log was examined frame by frame. Yet the answer never came. The Gripens had slipped through their fingers like smoke. Some experts argued it was impossible, that the jets must have been aided by unknown satellites or hacking systems. Others whispered that Sweden had developed a new kind of stealth, not based on hiding, but on becoming a ghost in the electronic world. Meanwhile, in Sweden, the pilots who had flown the mission remained unseen, their identities classified, their debriefings locked away. They were more than just pilots. They were symbols of a new doctrine. Sweden wasn't chasing power for conquest. It was building an unspoken shield, one that could strike fear without firing a single shot. The Gripen had shown that the age of brute force was ending, and the age of surgical precision had begun. But NATO wasn't ready to accept defeat. A week after the incident, they launched a secret test. Over the North Sea, advanced F-35s and Eurofighters formed a strike group, backed by warships bristling with missile systems. Their mission was simple: simulate an interception and prove that NATO still controlled the skies. What happened next became the nightmare they had feared. From the edges of the radar field, shadows moved. Gripens again, silent, invisible, untouchable. The F-35s adjusted course, radars scanning desperately, but the targets flickered in and out of existence. Every time the systems locked onto something, it dissolved into nothing. Within minutes, the warships began receiving signals that their own weapons were being targeted, not by real missiles, but by false electronic ghosts planted by the Gripens. The exercise collapsed into chaos. NATO pilots later admitted they felt hunted. One F-35 pilot described it as chasing phantoms in a mirror-filled sky. Another swore that for a moment, his own aircraft systems responded, as if controlled by an external hand. By the time the Gripens disengaged, NATO had no explanation. Billions of dollars worth of defense had been rendered useless, undone by aircraft costing a fraction of the price. The shockwave reached Washington, London, Berlin, and Paris. Politicians demanded answers. Was Sweden challenging NATO, or was it sending a warning? Officially, Sweden remained silent, but silence was louder than any declaration of power. The world's media picked up fragments of the story, fueling speculation that a new Cold War was forming, not between East and West, but between those who controlled traditional might and those who wielded new, unpredictable technology. Whispers emerged of something even darker. Intelligence leaks suggested that Gripen was no longer just an aircraft. It was part of a larger network. Satellites, ground-based systems, AI-driven drones, all connected in a hidden web of electronic dominance. If that were true, NATO wasn't facing a fighter jet. It was facing an invisible empire of information and control. And so, the fear deepened. Because Gripen had not yet revealed its full strength. The exercises were only a demonstration, a glimpse into a capability that could cripple even the strongest of alliances. NATO knew it, and the world knew it too. Sweden had shown that the rules of warfare had changed forever. The question wasn't whether NATO could stop Gripen. The question was, would anyone ever see its next move before it was too late? The days following the second incident were filled with unease. NATO generals convened in secret meetings across Europe, their faces pale, their voices hushed. They had witnessed something unprecedented twice, and still there was no answer. The Gripen was no longer just a jet. It had become a symbol of dread, a shadow lingering over every exercise, every patrol, every simulation. In Stockholm, behind layers of secrecy, Sweden's leaders debated what they had unleashed. Officially, Sweden had not fired a single shot. No one had been harmed, and yet the world trembled. For decades, Sweden had been underestimated, seen as a quiet nation caught between East and West. But now, that image was shattered. Gripen had rewritten the narrative, and its mystery was more powerful than any missile. Reports began circulating within intelligence networks. Strange patterns were noticed in communication lines, encrypted signals bouncing across Europe with unknown origins. Some believed it was Swedish experimentation. Others feared it was proof that Gripen wasn't alone, but part of an unseen swarm. Theories emerged of AI-driven systems that allowed Gripen to operate like a living entity, sensing, adapting, and striking faster than human reaction. If that were true, then Sweden had crossed into a realm of warfare that no one else dared to admit existed. NATO responded with escalation. Joint drills increased, air patrols doubled, and electronic countermeasures were deployed in every exercise. Yet the harder they tried, the more fragile their systems seemed. In one drill, an entire radar network shut down for 90 seconds, leaving warships blind. In another, communication between pilots scrambled into incoherent echoes. No one could prove Sweden was behind it, but everyone suspected. Gripen was becoming more than an aircraft. It was becoming a ghost story whispered in every command room. And then came the night that changed everything. A NATO fleet, led by advanced destroyers, moved through the Norwegian Sea under the cover of darkness. Satellites tracked the mission, drones circled overhead, and F-35s escorted the fleet. The mission was classified as a test of readiness, but everyone knew the real reason. It was bait, designed to lure the Gripens. Hours passed, and nothing happened. Commanders began to believe that perhaps Sweden had decided to step back. But just as dawn touched the horizon, the shadows appeared. Gripens, moving at impossible angles, sliding through radar gaps like water through cracks. The F-35s tried to intercept, their pilots desperate, but once again, the targets dissolved into phantoms. This time, however, it was different. Without firing a missile, the Gripens demonstrated their deadliest weapon. The destroyer's systems suddenly rebooted. Navigation froze, missile launchers locked, communication with satellites severed. It lasted less than 2 minutes, but those 2 minutes were enough. NATO's most powerful fleet was left blind, deaf, and defenseless, as if the entire armada had been turned into floating shells. Then, as quickly as it began, the systems returned to normal. Gripen had withdrawn, leaving only silence behind. The shock was absolute. NATO realized what Sweden had done. Gripen was not designed to destroy armies. It was designed to paralyze them. A weapon not of firepower, but of control. It could enter, dismantle, and vanish before an enemy even understood what had happened. For the first time in history, an alliance built on overwhelming force had been brought to its knees without a single casualty. The world was left in awe and fear. Newspapers called it the Phantom Strike. Analysts debated whether Sweden had revealed its hand or only a fraction of it. Some said Gripen had already redefined the meaning of war. Others feared that if Sweden ever chose to unleash its full potential, no superpower could withstand it. But perhaps the most unsettling truth was this: Gripen's silence was louder than any declaration of war. Sweden had not threatened, had not demanded, had not attacked, and yet every nation now watched the skies differently. Every radar operator, every pilot, every admiral carried the same question in their mind. If Gripen returned, would they even know it was there until it was too late? The mystery remained unsolved. NATO continued to strengthen its defenses, but deep down, its leaders knew the balance of power had shifted forever. Sweden had proven a chilling reality, that the greatest weapon is not the one that destroys, but the one that controls the fear of destruction. And as whispers spread across military corridors, one sentence echoed more than any other. Sweden's Gripen had just done what NATO feared most. The world was in shock, and it would never see the skies the same way again.